All right, well, welcome to this workshop, Building Wealth Through Real Estate on Any Budget. I'm Sammy and this is Fiona, and we'll introduce ourselves in a minute. And we're just super excited to have our first workshop of the year. Free workshop, help folks get into real estate.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, hey, I'm Sammy. I'm a real estate agent, realtor, and I come to this as a career change. I was an educator for 11 years. I worked in schools. I taught after school gardening. I ran school programs across entire charter school districts, did a lot of nonprofit youth work, and ended up just learning about real estate and how to buy property, and kind of like financial freedom really is what got me hooked into it, this idea of like work optional. So I started buying rental property, and then I got so into it that ended up becoming a realtor, and did some work in construction and affordable development. And I'm just really passionate about helping other folks get into real estate. And my goal is to retire by 40. Meaning my rental income is going to be enough to cover all my basic living expenses. So that's me. And Fiona.
And I'm Fiona Bryan. I'm a California licensed residential loan originator. So I lend on loans, 1 to 4 units properties. I also come to real estate as a career change. I was also in a nonprofit space, primarily arts and arts education. With communications and marketing. I did do a lot with financial aid and stuff like that. So I guess there were some numbers involved, but for me, really my passion is sort of the puzzle. And I look at lending as a puzzle. Every person that comes to the table has a different scenario. And for me, there are so many products out there that people just don't know about. And so, helping people learn about those and fitting them into loans for pretty much any scenario is really kind of my passion. And so I love to talk about that and ways to make it happen. So, and connected with Sammy about, I don't know, it's like a year and a half ago or so. And it was just kind of very like-minded. And so I get excited when we do these workshops together because we can come to you and provide value where you want it. So this is really not necessarily like us teaching a class. This is really us having a conversation with you and answering the questions that you have. And again, just trying to provide value where it's needed. I mean, I think this is definitely intended to be, getting started and strategies for getting started. But no matter where you are, we can chat about where you're at and where you want to be. So with real estate.
Awesome. Well, so basically what we want to cover is buying property, getting started in real estate, and kind of buying investment property specifically. So take it away, Fiona, and then we'll talk about a couple of like buying property and then also leveraging existing property. If you have property that you want to use to buy more property. And then we'll also talk about something called house hacking that I think is a great way to both live somewhere and invest.
Yeah. And then we have all of the questions that you guys sent in, so we'll take questions, but we'll also try to address all of those as well. So I mean, I think the biggest thing when buying investment property is there are 2 ways to look at it. Are you going to occupy the property? Or are you not going to occupy the property? And so as a lender, that's really where my interest lies, because there's 2 different loans, whether you're going to live in it or not. And so that to me is the biggest difference. How much you have to invest. There are different products we can put you into different slots, and we can go into detail about that. But essentially it's, conventional versus non-qualified mortgage, which is, are you going to go with a traditional product, which is what most people know about? Like, I need to have 25% down, and I have to, I have to do all of this. But really, that's not the case. There's actually, again, on any budget, is kind of really where we're coming at is, how can we show you how to make this work? So Sammy, I think, is probably the best to talk about how to get started and strategies for getting started, because they have done it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you shared is really important. So there's a few key terms. So like a lot of people ask me about like first time home buyer programs, right? And I think the bigger difference isn't so much are you a first time home buyer, or because you could be a first time home buyer and there's sort of like limit, you could have not bought a home for 3 years or more, so that's like less of the big divide in lending. But the big divide in lending is, are you going to live in the property or not? And so
And if
that's
it's a
going to really,
multi-unit, will you live in one of the units?
right, yes,
Yeah, because if you live in one of the units, it's considered an owner occupied property.
exactly. So are you going to live in it? And if it's a duplex, triplex, fourplex, you can live in one, and that's considered owner occupant. And so theoretically, if it's a single family property and you're going to live in it, it's a little bit less of an investment property. I mean, obviously there's long-term appreciation and equity, right? So as you pay down your mortgage, you're going to build equity in the property because your mortgage is going to get smaller, what you owe, and then so you actually own more of the property. And so there's a little bit of the like long-term investing in a single family, but obviously the 2 to 4 units has a little bit more of the rental income piece of investment property. And then
about leveraging the property later, which we'll talk about, and then also house hacking, which is what we'll lead into after.
Exactly. So the other thing is, I mean, do you want to talk about the difference between like 1 to 4 units and then what happens after 5 units from a lending perspective?
So from a residential lending standpoint, the loans are if you have a 1 to 4 unit property. So when you go from a single 1 unit property to a duplex, it becomes basically an investment property. And so the loan structure is just a little bit different. The expectations for down payment are a little bit different. Again, when we want to stick to that whole any budget thing, there are actually different types of products. Do you want me to go into specifically, like, just kind of run down what there are? I mean, on the owner occupied side, if you do a conventional loan, the lender is going to ask for 15 to 25% down if you're going to owner occupy it. Now, if you're not going to live in it, you need to have 25% down. So that's where it gets kind of scary when you jump from the single to the duplex. However, FHA has a product that is not intended specifically as an investor product. However, you can do up to 4 units, and then the down payment minimum is 3.5%. So that's where there are some opportunities to sort of get in with a little bit less cash. Now on the non-qualified mortgage, so we're moving away from conventional lending and into different investors. There are bank statement loans for owner occupied. And so you can actually do that, and you can do that with as little as 10% down. And those loans really are primarily going to be impacted most by your credit score and the amount of cash that you're going to put down. So that's on the owner occupied side. On the non-owner occupied, so solely an investment, you're not going to live in the property. You generally, they want to make sure that you actually already own a primary residence. They want to see that you've been the owner of a home. There are situations where we are able to get you into a home without owning it and have an investment, but we need to talk about that. So can happen though. So anyway, with the non-owner occupied, you're not going to live there, sole investment. In conventional lending, that's where they're going to ask for 25% down payment. If you do a bank statement loan, again, you can stick at the 10% down. Now, the non-owner occupied debt service credit ratio, which is a really great loan that I think is it's an amazing investor loan. You can qualify for the loan based on your credit score and the debt service. So essentially, as long as there's a 1-to-1 ratio between what your mortgage payment is and what the income from the property, then it qualifies. There are products where if it doesn't quite ratio, we can make it work, but it's sort of like the higher the risk, the higher the interest rate, and you really kind of need to make sure that you're actually going to be cash flowing. So those are all things that we take a look at, how smart of an investment is this when we do that kind of thing. So those are the two sort of categories of lending: owner occupied and non-owner occupied, and how much cash you sort of have to have available for those.
And then also the interest rate would change for owner occupant versus investor, right?
Yeah, and we're actually not seeing as huge a difference as we were when conventional base rates were like sort of at like 2.5%. They're sort of coming closer together now. So for example, I think last week I closed on one, a debt service ratio, we were at 3.25. Now he bought down with points, he bought that interest rate, but that's still a very good rate for an investment property. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, those rates are going to be a little bit higher. You're probably going to be paying closer to the higher threes, closer to 4%. But those are still very low. And we're seeing a lot of volatility in the market, but it's still really cheap money when you think about it. So.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. So in terms of buying an investment property, when I talk to folks, like the first thing I want to know is, are you planning to live there, or is this just strictly an investment property? You're going to rent it out, because that's going to really change what your lending looks like. And then the other piece is, if you're looking for a single family versus a 2 to 4 unit, it's going to change the down payment that you might have to bring. And we can talk about this a little bit in the house hacking piece, but if you're going to plan to live in, if you're trying to buy a duplex, for example, and you're doing an owner occupant loan, by necessity, one of the units would have to be vacant in order for you to move in. And we live in Los Angeles, there's rent control. There's actually very few multifamily units that have a vacant unit. They're kind of like prime real estate and very competitive. So that's just another consideration in the search is, do you want to move there? And then also just like from an emotional standpoint, sometimes when you're looking for a house that you want to live in, you're going to be looking at different criteria than strictly the numbers investment, right? So you might pick different neighborhoods, you might pick, you might pick different states, but let's say you're looking locally. You might have different priorities for something you're going to live in, right? You might say, I need X number of bedrooms and bathrooms because I'm going to live there. Whereas if it's just strictly an investment, you're more looking at the income versus how many bedrooms, right? So it sort of changes the trajectory of our search, and also is going to change some of your lending. So, and then anything, just to clarify, anything 5+ units is considered a commercial loan. And so you're going to look at a totally different criteria, lending category.
It's a different one.
That's a whole different. And so so that's why we're focusing on the 1 to 4 units is still considered residential, even though obviously a 4-plex is a rental income property. So
yeah. And Marlene asks, so the single family home is different than owner occupied. So a single family home, you can either owner occupy it or not owner occupy it. So you can buy it to live in it, or you can buy it to rent it. And so if you're living in it, it's owner occupied. If you're not living in it, it's non-owner occupied. And it kind of, a few slides from now, we start to talk about house hacking. And so there are ways that you can, earn income and Househack with a single family home while you're residing in it. The other thing is that a single family home in LA County, even if you have an ADU, it's still considered a single family home. Sorry, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. And so those are sort of like people who are converting garages. There's a lot of that happening, and people are building those. And so the thing to keep in mind is that from a lender standpoint and the way that those are zoned and untitled, they are declared single family residents. So while you could move in and rent one of those out, it's still considered a single family home, which is great because again, the loan on it and the expected down payment is going to be lower on that than it would be if it was a full second unit.
Awesome.
So
let's talk.
Sammy,
Yeah.
well, one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking is, you know, how do you get started? Because, you know, we talk about 2 units, 4 units, all of this. Like, so what if I don't own any real estate yet, and I'm thinking about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, well, the best way, I mean, and this is a good, we did have a question, which is, you know, how do we, what helps get you, what makes you competitive, right, in this market right now, as a buyer who hasn't bought real estate before, in what is now a seller's market currently, January 2022, what's the sort of competitive advantage? And so, I think both of those questions kind of come together, which is having a really good team. I mean, that is one of the big pieces, because, you know, if you are just kind of on your own, like you got your pre-qualification letter online on some online, you know, website, and then you're just trying to like use Zillow and go to open houses and figure it out on your own, it's a very different scenario than, you know, you've gotten pre-qualified with someone who's going to run through all these scenarios with you. Because I mean, if you were following everything Fiona was saying, awesome, but like there's a lot of scenarios that you could be like, you know, what are you looking for? And so really the question is, what do you want? And our job is to help make that happen. I mean, I don't care what you buy. I want you to buy something that makes sense for you. Our job is to help you, you know, lay out the pathway to get there. So I feel
like, don't you feel like over the last year or so, more of our job has become selling, marketing our buyers?
It's true.
Really, I'm marketing my borrower. I'm deep in the numbers. You know, that agent, the listing agent can call me and I can tell them everything about, you know, why this is a good, you know, borrower to accept. And I think we've had some really good success. You know, we've pretty much tried everything. And I think in the last like 6 to 8 months, we've really kind of hit it home. But I also think it benefits you to have a local lender and somebody who knows the area, somebody who's really familiar with everything. So I know that has really been a bonus for me, is just sort of being, you know, known that local here on the ground. If you need to call me on a Sunday, I'm here. Yeah. I mean, the listing agent, you know, who works for the seller, their job is to get the house sold. And if they've got, you know, 10, 15, 40 offers, right? What's like, I mean, price obviously is one of the big ones, but also terms, right? Like how quickly can you get your inspections done, the appraisal, your loan contingencies, all these sort of pieces. And I mean, there's been multiple times where we've closed a deal and the agent says, you know, you were the one following up the most and telling me how great your client was. And I mean, I'm not lying, my clients are great, but like I mean, it is about the relationships. And so I think in terms of getting started, I mean, the obvious first thing is to just like get yourself emotionally ready to, okay, like let me explore this and let me take just the next step toward this, right? And the next step usually is talking to a good lender who's going to run through the scenarios with you and not just give you like a letter that is your max, right? Your max pre-qualification, because sometimes you don't want to pay your max. You want to
like your max, you might qualify for $1 million house, but you don't want to make that payment. You
And I always
you
tell
don't
people
want
you
that
need
to be
to
your monthly.
try on that monthly payment. You really need to try that monthly payment on, especially if you're thinking of house hacking or trying to, sort of,
Right.
use this as a future investment. Because if it's not, it doesn't matter. You really aren't looking at the price of the house. You're looking at how much it's going to cost you on a monthly basis. The purchase price really is secondary. But I think you're right. I think the other thing I will say is that I talk to a lot of people who are, they're hesitant to reach out. They're looking on Zillow, they're doing all this stuff, doing all the research. But the problem is that until you know exactly what your numbers look like, what you're going to qualify for, it doesn't do anything. And so what really happens once you actually get, not just pre-qualified or pre-approved, once we start running scenarios, then when you're looking at Zillow, or whatever real estate sites, then when you're looking at those properties, you can go into an open house and you actually have a legitimate understanding of what that purchase price means to you financially, right? Yeah, it's just
Yeah, that's so yeah, I mean, please. I was like on Zillow all the time looking at stuff, right? But one of the things I regret in my own personal real estate journey is not just reaching out to a lender sooner, because I just didn't understand, like, oh, it's not just how much you make, it's your debt income, like you actually don't need as much down as you might think you do. And I just like I didn't really explore that, and I didn't have someone earlier who would just like sit down and walk me through it. And so it just becomes a little bit more real when you're like, oh, okay, this is what I actually qualify for.
Yeah.
Then we can start searching for stuff, and we're looking actually in your range of what you want to be at. And then the search becomes a little bit less like I'm looking on Zillow, before bed every night, like drooling over these houses, and a little bit more like, oh,
that could happen.
Maybe I could buy this house, right? Like, and so it just changes the like emotional space of looking.
Yeah.
But
one more thing before we go on. One of the things I saw you mention was, inflation, how to stave off inflation, and why real estate is going to be a good place to go. I read that and I was like, ooh, we need to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I think especially today, like I think the stock market lost 3%. My dad was telling me, oh my God, my stocks. I think this is a really good time to sort of have that discussion, because as things do in inflation, we have appreciation. And so we want to make sure that, you're protecting your cash. If your cash is just sitting there and inflation is still going on, let's talk about, why would we, the market's going crazy. Why now? Why should we be getting in now?
Well, I think, I mean, one of the things is, I think you're just right on in terms of like talking about rates and how interest rates, I'd be interested in you talking about that, like how interest rates affect the market too, because that is a big question. Yeah, exactly. Why now when prices are wild? I think, Fiona, you put together a scenario once of like, if you buy now and, here's the interest rate now, let's say 6 months from now, there's a little bit of a price drop, right? The house costs X% less, but interest rates have risen.
Yeah.
I think the monthly payment either stays the same or gets bigger even when the house is cheaper.
Yeah. And I think we looked at it once and it was like, oh, I want to save another 20 grand, or I want to save another whatever. And it's, inflation catches up and appreciation in that period of time. You're looking at buying less with the same amount of money or with more money. It went out of my head what I was going to say, but and they're asking like, why buy now when the prices are wild? But I also think like, why buy now when rates are going up? Well, the thing is, we've been sitting on this weird, really low interest rates for a couple of years now, and they're not going to go up significantly, drastically. It's not going to be a huge, massive decline, knock on wood. Yes. But I do think that because we have so much inflation right now, we're going to see it swing and then calm down, because the Fed is going to definitely want to temper things. But whether it's good or not, I think that, real estate is always a good investment. And I think that we've seen that, and we can look at charts over, the ups and downs. It's even when it comes down, it comes back up even higher. And, I've just watched that happen with my parents and, people who've invested, my clients that have had properties in the South Bay for just, 15 years. And I mean, these people they owe like $100,000 on a $1.4 million house now, because they've just sat on it. So I think if you're thinking, if this sounds like something you want to do, and it sounds like something that you're interested in, and I know, you may not be as passionate as Sammy and I are, but it feels like it's right. I kind of feel like the more you learn about it, the more passionate you become about it, especially when you start hanging out with other people that are talking about it all the time. Because it's, yeah, I mean, I just feel like everybody needs a place to live. We're always going to need a place to live. And there's such low inventory right now, but something is going to have to give, really. I really feel like at some point it's going to have to give. So
I know, who knows?
yeah.
There is a question. So if house prices go down, the interest rates will go up.
I don't think they're connected. They're not really necessarily connected, but I think we saw a little bit of a feeding frenzy this summer. We saw people doing some really crazy things, waiving appraisal contingencies, paying way more than a house was going to appraise for, things like that, bidding wars, because there's so little, so little inventory out there. There's like 30 people bidding on one house. They just bid it up. So that's where the prices are going up. I think, we start to see, you kind of see I don't even know if it's like prices are coming down, but it's really sort of that chaotic energy doesn't feel like it's quite there anymore. I think that was a little bit of a frenzy. And I mean, who knows, we may see it again come spring and summer, when people start, putting their houses on the market, more frequently, but they're not connected. But we do know that rates are going to go up. They're going to go up because there is inflation. We are likely to probably see some, recession. I don't think COVID is going anywhere anytime soon. I think we're going to be weathering that up and down. And so we're gonna see a lot of swinging. But I don't think they're going to go up significantly. But even if they go up a half a point and the rates come down, it's still going to wash out, right?
Yeah, I mean, from a price and interest, they don't actually affect each other, but in terms of like, if the interest rate's lower and you make the same amount of money,
right?
Your salary is the same, but the interest rate's lower, your monthly payment on the house becomes smaller, which means you can afford more house. So people who, the interest rates have been low, more people could afford to buy, and then inventory was low. So then it's been very competitive. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to stay competitive or not. I do know that if you are looking for a house or an investment property and you're I'm very conservative because to me, real estate was very scary. Like, I didn't have any experience with real estate. I was a teacher who ran really cool programs with high school students. And like, for me, real estate was just like a whole other language, a whole other, like, so I was very scared. And so the way I dealt with that fear was by really learning about how does it work? And then just being very conservative with numbers. And so, I think you can, if you're very, if you're just very, I don't know what it is, I guess, like disciplined, like, this is the monthly payment that works for me. Let's look in this range. Maybe we'll stretch it a little bit because this is how so great and we love it and it's worth it in the long run. But like, you're not going to be,
Yeah.
you're going to be locking in a 30-year loan at the lowest interest rates in history,
Right.
and your monthly payment is going to stay the same. So once you buy your house, who cares what the market does?
Yeah.
If you're not a flipper, or like trying to, if you tell me I'm going to live here for a year and sell it, then we're going to take a different approach.
Yeah.
But if but if you're like, yeah, I'm going to live here, or I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to buy this duplex, I'm going to live here for a few years, then I'm going to move and rent this out and keep it. Basically, if you hold real estate, you don't wait to buy real estate, you buy real estate and wait, then you're fine. Who cares what the market's doing? Right. The people who care what the market's doing are the people sitting on the sidelines, waiting for this, crash to happen. But if you're actually in the market, just stay disciplined and stay, like, don't get too, carried away.
And I mean, when you talk about discipline and strategy, I mean, that's kind of like that's it, right? Like, what is my goal here? What do I want this to look like? And what do I need to do to get that? So, but yeah, hold them. Yeah. And so that kind of, I mean, I want to make sure that we are talking about the things that people want us to talk about. So, because I don't know how many experienced investors are in here or not, but I just want to kind of, if we could go to the next, where we're talking about leveraging existing property, I think that's a good segue, because you're starting somewhere, and whether you start by buying a single family and house hacking, or you buy a duplex and live on one side, or you're able to kind of just go ahead and start investing right away, you can always leverage the property that you have, because the equity that you have in that home, it's money. And when you talk about holding them, rather than sell the property, selling the property is one option. And then, so there are ways that you can do exchanges, so you don't pay capital gains and things like that. But truly, if you wanted to grow the number of properties that you have, leveraging the existing property with the equity that you've earned, we've seen a lot of people do that with a cash out refinance over the past couple of years, or simply living in the home, saving up cash, and then just leaving it as is and moving on to, another property. And the beautiful thing about it is that once you've started and you've kind of, you're, again, I think spending time in these communities, learning about, what are other people doing? What is what's working for other people? How are they, do they have multiple sources of income? What's, Sammy wants to retire by 40. Well, I missed that by about 10 years, but I've got similar goals, right? So, in terms of leveraging, there are multiple ways to do it, but I think the most common way that I see people do it is a cash out. Yes, I can talk to you about cash out versus HELOC. Oh, my favorite topic. Yes. Okay. Okay.
You do love that topic.
Oh my God. Don't get me started. Okay.
All right. Cash out versus HELOC. Go.
Yeah. Is credit card debt good? Okay. HELOC versus cash out. A cash out refinance, you tap into the equity of your home. You're essentially refinancing that loan. You're taking out a bigger loan, taking the cash from that home. That cash is yours. What we've seen recently is that some of the investment property rates have been so high that we needed to refinance these people anyway. So we've been able to take the cash out and either lower or keep their payments the same. That's an awesome move, right? Now, if you're purchasing the house to make an investment, like we want to look at the numbers. Does it make sense to take this cash out, increase my monthly payment on the current home or property? What do the numbers say? So a lot of times people want to take out a HELOC because they don't have to refinance. There's not as many fees associated with a HELOC, although you're still paying for it. And HELOCs are a little bit harder to come by right now, especially standalone HELOCs. Even the big banks really aren't doing them. They don't really do them a lot for investments. They will do them from primary residences, but a HELOC, the way that a HELOC works, so conventional loan, you have your mortgage, you pay it off, it's over 3 years, it's a fixed interest rate. A HELOC is a variable interest rate loan. It acts like a credit card. So if you don't use the money in there, you don't pay interest on it. You can pay it off like a credit card, you can use it like a credit card, but it's a credit card. I have to tell you, I refinance people all the time who have taken out a HELOC to do a kitchen remodel. They did it 8 years ago. They're starting to look down the line. It's interest only for 10 years, and then it balloons for the 20 remainder years. So it feels really good at first because it's a tiny little payment because you're only paying interest on it. But the minute that you hit that 10-year mark, you're paying it like an amortized loan anyway. It balloons, and the full loan can be due, but a lot of them, the line of credits are actually, you're no longer allowed to draw on it, and then it's amortized. So unless you're coming into a lot of cash, I would never recommend getting a HELOC. I really wouldn't. The time to get a HELOC, and the reason that those are really good, is because when you need money, it's hard to find, right? It's hard to get money when you actually need it. So if you have a lot of equity in your home and you don't really need the cash, you're not going to use it for anything, get a HELOC and then don't use it. Because then if you have an emergency, you can tap into it. But it literally is an emergency fund. I would never recommend somebody take a HELOC on their house, because you're going to be paying, the Wall Street Journal published rate is what most of them are right today. That's 3.25, I think, is what the current rate is, plus the margin that the bank charges you. So you're going to be paying about 5, 6, 7% interest only. So it feels like it's a tiny little payment, but after 10 years, you can no longer draw on it, and you're going to have to start paying it back. And so what happens is people call me and they're like, oh my God, I got to refinance because I don't want to pay that huge payment. So then we just pull the money out of the house anyway. So we can save a lot of time by exploring all the options, and ultimately a cash out almost always makes more sense. So
if you're a flipper,
it's a credit card.
So if you're flipping a house, right, and you're like, I just need cash, I'm buying this, I know I'm going to sell, right? You buy a house for 500, you put 200 into it, you sell it for $1 million, right? As an example. So you need 200K and a HELOC for and you're going to make that back because you're going to sell the property, right? HELOC's great because it's like, you're just sort of using the money and then revolving that money and, putting it back into the pot. But if you're, if you're buying a rental and you're not gonna refinance or get money back or sell it, then you're kind of like not getting the best deal.
And I think it's really important for us to also distinguish that this is probably not a conversation that involves flipping like this tonight. We're not talking about flipping. If you want to buy houses and flip them, that's a whole other webinar. So I think there are flippers that probably do the HELOC thing, but if you're going to be flipping houses, that is something that uses hard money, much more expensive, much different loan. Somebody did ask, I saw in the questions, how long do you have to how long do you hold the house before you can actually tap into the equity? You can actually refinance the home after 6 months. I usually say 6 or 7 payments. Some of these loans do have prepayment penalties. The debt service ratio and investor loans, almost all of them have prepayment penalties. And the reason for that is they do not want flippers coming and using those loans. You cannot, you're going to pay like a 5% penalty, in which case you should just go get the hard money loan anyway. So again, not talking about flipping here, but in terms of leveraging that property, after about 6 months, you can definitely refinance. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless, 12 months is going to be the minimum seasoning before you can actually take cash out. So Yeah, it's that whole refinance question. I would say, if you think you're going to want to refinance in a year, that's okay. But I don't think you're going to get much done in 6 months. So, yeah.
Right. A scenario in which it might make sense to do a cash out refinance reasonably quickly would be, so let's say you buy a house and you're essentially a refinance could essentially be a flip, but you're living in it and you're not selling it. And that's called the BRRRR method. It's buy, rehab it, rent it, refinance, repeat. But you could also live in it, right? So you could buy a house that needs work, fix it up, and now you've actually forced the appreciation. So you've made, a $500,000 house, you've made it worth $750 because you remodeled it and made it worth more, right? Because now it's fully remodeled. So in that scenario, it kind of makes sense to go 12 months and do a cash out refinance to basically pay yourself back for the work that you did. But unless the market is just, some people were just doing a refinance because the market was going so high that their equity, the house was worth more. But it's not necessarily, do you want to pull,
won't, you have to provide all the receipts, you have to do, because it won't matter what it appraises at. You still need that 12 months of seasoning. In fact, it kind of over the last, there was a lot of pushback recently because the guidelines say, but so many people were trying to cash out and basically get themselves back to where they were when they purchased, so that they essentially have 100% loan. That there was a lot of pushback from lenders, and that 12-month seasoning is really is tight. And so somebody asked a really good question. I think it was Asia. How does a cash out refi work when you already have a low interest rate on an investment property, and how much equity has to be left in the property? So if you already have a low interest rate, you're essentially cashing out to borrow more money. So if the interest rate is going up and the money makes sense with what you're going to do with it, then the higher interest rate makes sense. Cash out rates are definitely a little bit higher than when you purchase, and that's simply a risk thing. Rates are correlated directly with risk, which includes your credit score, the amount of cash you have available, and the equity in the home. And so as far as how much equity has to be left in the property, okay, so for conventional lending, you need to have at least 25%. So you can borrow up to 75%. So if you purchase it 25% down and you have 25% equity gain, when you go to cash it out, you can pull the 25% out, but no more than that. As far as the other cash out, there are some investors that will do up to 85%, which again, the interest rates on that are pretty high though. So you have to really have a good purpose for doing that. And then we track it and we refinance it, 7 or 8 months later, just rate and term. So there are definitely some strategies, but you kind of have to have a really good game plan to know what you're going to do with the cash when you take it out, because otherwise it's not worth taking it out. Yeah.
Right. Because you're paying interest on it. So
yeah,
you have to have a plan for that. And so, ultimately, like in terms of, leveraging existing properties. So for me, it was like, yes, you have to get started, right? Because if you don't get started, right, you got to take the first step. But for me, it wasn't just like, how do I get the one? It's what's the plan? Because one isn't going to, I'm not going to be financially free from one property. Mm-hmm. And so the real is like, well, then what? What's the next step? How do you? And so the plan really has to be, okay, so the first, then how do you leverage that? And I was just thinking about, just how to scale, and just talking through like, okay, you're going to buy this. Is this the place you're going to be in the long term? And we can talk a little bit more about this house hacking, but you know, the ideal scenario is you're sort of like daisy chaining properties, and you buy one and then you either save up or refinance, you know, when it's time, and then you don't sell that one, you refinance, take cash out, use that as the, you know, cash for the next one. So, you know, I'm a realtor, I'm supposed to try to get houses listed, but I mostly talk people out of selling their houses, because I'm like, well, do you have to sell? Like, if you have to sell to buy the next one, okay, you know, there's various reasons for that, and that's fine. But to me, the goal is, well, how do you buy the next one without selling the last one, right?
Right.
And so this is where having someone who's, you know, kind of just like with getting started with the first one, thinking creatively about the lending,
Right.
It's like, okay, how do we make this work? How do we help you refinance? What needs to happen?
Right.
And then use that to just keep scaling, because that's the only way to scale, really. I mean, everyone who's scaling, unless you make like a ton of money and you're just able to save a down payment every year, it's like ultimately at a certain point you are leveraging the equity of your existing properties.
Yes.
Maybe not like that next year, because has the equity really gotten big enough? But if you're consistent, you know, my partner has been buying for many years, and my business partner in our investments, and he's now taking the equity from properties bought before and using that to buy the next one. It's just sort of like that snowball
And
effect.
once you look at it on paper, I mean, that's the thing, is like, there's no shortcuts. You have to let things age. Once you look at it on paper, you're like, oh no, yeah, keep it. But I also think that, you know, just to back up just a tiny bit is, you know, I talked about the difference between a conventional loan and then sort of what we call the non-qualified mortgages. So these are different investors that do sort of, you know, the income that we look at is a little bit different. We use a lot of those loans for self-employed too, by the way. So if you're a 1099 or a business owner, those loans are oftentimes very good. But if you have a W-2, we start out with a conventional loan. We can very easily do that. And then, you know, once you have 2 or 3 properties, it's like, oh, well, how do I do this and qualify from an income standpoint? And that's where we start to shift over to some of these investor loans. So it's almost like there's this whole toolbox that we can dig into. And like I said, every situation is so very different. But I feel like it's such a big topic that we're sort of kind of like going back and forth. But should we talk a little bit about the house hack and then open up for questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, feel free to.
We've been going for now. We can talk later.
I hope this is.
Okay.
I hope this is valuable for folks. We love talking about this stuff, but yeah, and feel free to just throw questions in the chat, and then, you know, we'll do our best. And so house hacking is basically like the hybrid version of investing and living, right? So I would say there's sort of like 3 main ways to house hack, and they kind of, I'll do them like in order of cost. I think go one more slide. So so house hacking is essentially like a cute term from Bigger Pockets, that is, you know, like how you know, like a life hack. And so it's basically buying a house or buying property, but finding creative ways to make it cost less. And so if you're looking at, you know, if you're like, great book you got to read, Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin. Super awesome book about, you know, getting to financial freedom. And so, you know, the perspective I'm coming from this is financial freedom. And so if you lower your expenses, you're able to retire faster because you have to make less from rental income to live. And if you look at your expenses overall, housing, I mean, hands down, is your biggest expense. Like, you know, this whole, oh, you know, don't go to Starbucks or whatever, don't get your coffee. It's like, yeah, I mean, maybe some people are spending quite a bit of money on coffee, but like, your housing is going to make the biggest dent in your and your expenses. The book is Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin. I'll throw it in the chat. And so, so basically ways to reduce your housing. So 3 main ways I would say to house hack is you buy a house and then you rent out rooms. And it's like actually not that complicated, right? It's basically like having roommates, except you own the house. And so they're helping you pay the mortgage by paying rent, which you guys would have paid anyway. So that's one way. That's easy. The reason the single family house piece is the the chat is great right now. Starbucks and real estate. And so the reason that's the easiest is because you can get into a single family house with like the lowest amount down, right? Because it's not considered a 2 to 4 unit, and you can put, you know, 3.5%, 5% down on a house. Obviously, the more you put down, it can zero. Oh yeah, sorry, zero. VA loans, etc. Yeah. So so that's kind of like, and then, you know, but cons is you're sharing a house with people, so some people might not be into that. So then the next way would be to just buy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, and, you know, live in one unit and rent out the other units. That's a great way to house hack. It's that you're basically buying an investment property, but you're living in one unit and then you're collecting rent from the other one. That's nice because, you know, you have your own space, your own kitchen and stuff, and you're not sharing it. In LA, it's a little bit harder because you have to have a vacant unit to move into. So it's just going to slow down the search a lot because we're going to have to find something. And the other units, if they're rent controlled, the rents might actually be very, very low, below market. And I'm all for rent control. But if you're, you know, using that rent to pay your mortgage and the rent's like $800 a month when the market rent's $2,000, you know, it's gonna affect your numbers, and it's kind of up to you if you want to be, you know, displacing folks from their homes in order to get the higher rent. So, you know, you become a landlord. It's kind of a different vibe, but obviously having that investment property, living in one, is a great way to go. It's also costs a little bit more because you do have to put more down for a 2 to 4 unit, unless you're doing FHA, in which, as Fiona talked about. But, you know, FHA loan in this market, trying to find a duplex with a vacant unit, it is possible. I have done it. But let me tell you, you're going to be searching for a lot longer than if we just buy a single family house. And then the other piece that I think costs the most is buying a house. You can actually buy multi-units and do this too, but let's say you buy a single family house and then you build the other unit. It's called an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, and you either build from scratch or you convert a garage. And this is, you know, legal in all of California and other states as well. And you know, you're basically making a new unit of housing, which I think from a housing shortage perspective is really awesome because you're literally creating more housing in your backyard. The cons of that is, you know, it's construction. You are like literally building a new thing in your backyard, and it's cash intensive because, you know, you put your down payment. Fiona is not going to finance the ADU. That is a good question. Is there a type of funding you can access for ADUs? So we can talk about that.
There are construction loans, yeah.
Yeah, so there are, and if you live in it, there's owner occupant construction loan. Or as we talked about, leveraging your existing property. A lot of people right now are doing a cash out refinance or a HELOC or whatever works best. And instead of buying a new property, they're using that cash to build the ADU. And so that is an option as well. And that's something that you could buy a house with, you know, maybe you're not going to build the ADU tomorrow, but you save up and you're going to do it, you know, in a couple of years, right? So in terms of like your long-term thinking, the ADU is a really exciting possibility. So those are kind of like the house hacking ideas with the goal of reducing your housing payment by collecting rental income to pay your own mortgage, basically. Did you want to talk about, we had some questions in the chat.
Good. Well, somebody asked about the ADU funding.
Funding for ADUs.
Yeah, there are different ways that you can leverage the equity in the house to build ADU. There are also actually multiple loans now that that are geared towards people who are wanting to build the ADUs at purchase. So they're not always the friendliest loans. I think if you can come up with the cash or conserve cash when you're making your down payment, definitely much easier, because then you can pick your own, contractor. And I think right now, a lot of the construction loans have been sort of not loved by investors because of all of like the shortage of materials and time delays and things like that. And so they really, I think they really weren't making any money on those loans. So not fast enough anyway. So there are probably some better ways of doing it than the one-time construction close. But yeah, there are definitely some loans there. Should we open up for?
Yeah. So any other questions? You can throw them in the chat. I'm gonna look through some of the questions in the meantime.
If anybody wants to come on video, that was fun last time.
Yeah. How do homeowners?
You're gonna open up the microphones if anybody wants to unmute themselves.
I think so. I think that's possible. Or if you're shy, you can just put your question in the chat. There was a question. Yeah, I mean, one of the questions, because our title was on any budget.
Oh yeah.
So one of the questions was, what makes it possible, quote, on any budget? So I'd love to hear you talk more about that, Fiona.
Yeah, and Marlene actually says, what should be a savings goal for a newbie for a down payment on the easiest option? Again, that kind of depends, right? So people always say like, oh, I'm saving 5%. And I'm like, well, 5% of what? So really, we kind of got to get a picture of what it is that you want to do. Are you wanting to buy a single family home? Where is it? What are the average, purchase prices around that area? And so with a single family residence, I mean, there are some bond programs actually in California that are designed to help push you past that sort of cash crunch. Some of them some of them are actually second loans that sit deferred for the life of the loan. Some of them are actually forgivable grants. If you are, a first responder or a teacher, an educator, there are types of, grants like that will pay for closing costs or down payment. Huge variety of things. So it's really kind of like an individual thing. We can probably take a look at your income, what your current savings are, what your ability to save is. But I also think that there are times when people have more savings. They have more than they think they needed. More times than not, the people who are like, oh, I'm never going to get there are the ones who have like, I saved $20,000 last year, or, things like that. So when there's a will, there's a way. And so by any budget, I mean that we can work with any budget. It may not be tomorrow that you purchase, but our goal is long-term. So time is on our side.
Yeah. And I think also that's the thing is like, we all have kind of preconceptions about what we can and can't do. And so, I think like, oh, I have a lot of student loan debt, or I have the, and it's like, it's really nerdy what Fiona does. Like, it's just very like,
it's a puzzle.
I mean, it's a puzzle piece, and it's like, we don't know how the different debt is going to get treated. You don't really need an 810 credit score. Like after a certain point, it's kind of like all
some
the
of these
same.
They start at 600.
So it's like
580.
Who cares if you're credited? So it's like there's, and then also like once you start the process, you might actually realize there's some things like credit or debt. And so we have folks we know who like help with credit repair and, getting old charge-offs off. And so really it's like, if you don't start the process and like actually talk through some of that stuff, then, we can put a plan together of like, okay, well, what does this look like? Oh, you got to go talk to our friend Shiva who does credit repair and then come back in a couple months, or, whatever it is. And so you can kind of get that.
If you haven't sat down with a financial advisor, a planner, I'm not talking about like a JD Edwards buy stock kind of advisor. I'm actually talking about like a planner who actually, walks through these kinds of things for you, with you. So, but yeah, you got to put together a team around yourself. That's kind of what Sam and I have done. We've built a team of people that we work in conjunction with one another. Asia's asking, is there a way to still work with you both if we're looking in other states, Texas in particular? So I am only licensed in the state of California to do loans. However, Academy Mortgage does have branches there. And I actually have worked fairly closely with one of the loan officers down there that has worked with a couple of my clients. So I can refer you to somebody.
Awesome. Yeah, we can always refer out to other states.
Want to talk about scenarios. I mean, we can chit chat about it. Texas is a very different state, very different market. So you would definitely want to, get your advice from somebody who's knowledgeable about those regulations and so.
There was an interesting question about what qualities should you seek or be aware of in an investment partner? How do you know when someone might be a good match? That's a very good question. I'm assuming that means like
to go in with,
to invest with. Is that kind of what the question was on that? I mean, in buying property with someone is like a financial marriage. Mm-hmm. So, I definitely work with folks who are kind of thinking about like buying property together, and there's a really cool way to do that. Yeah, good ones and not good ones. I've definitely bought property with investment partners, right? And so it's there. I think it's just very good to like lay out all of the, what could go wrong, right? Because if everything goes right, then great. But
and possibly consult an attorney to help you write up some documentation. I think that's a really
And sometimes, so if you're buying investments in an LLC, that's also going to affect your lending. That's kind of a question people ask, like, should I make an LLC if I'm investing? It's essentially going to restrict you to only investor loans if you do that, versus buying in your own name. There's another way that people buy property together called tenants in common, TIC. And so that is also, a way you basically can split it up in different percentages. And you can create a TIC agreement that is basically like a legal document saying, what if one of us dies? What if we want to sell? What if one of us wants to get out and the other one doesn't? What if, I don't know, like how do we split expenses, right? So you do kind of want to talk about all those things, and it's kind of annoying and weird because you're like, no one wants to die. But no matter
how well you know the person, it's really important to do that because, I think I can speak for both of us. We've gotten into situations where we've advised people, to take some steps and they haven't, and it sort of it kind of wastes everybody's time because you're going to get to a point where if you haven't figured stuff out up front, something is going to come up. And fortunately for our clients, came up before they'd actually done the deal. So that worked out okay. But I think in the future, I really feel pretty strongly that if you're going in with somebody, I think I would feel better doing business with you if we had that all sort of meted out up front. Because nobody wants to have those unpleasant conversations, but having them up front is better.
And you're just sort of like the contract is just sort of like a just in case,
business
sort of
deal.
like an insurance, and it can be among two friends and that's fine. But yeah, like
Yeah.
what happens if one of us wants to
Yeah.
sell? What if one of us dies? Who inherits our half of the property? How do we buy each other out? Like,
Yeah.
is
And
there an
Patricia,
appraisal?
the conversations are like what Sammy is saying, but also things like, well, who's responsible for the taxes? Who's paying the home insurance? Is one of you going to live there? Is one of you not? Like, I mean, there's a whole variety of things. And even if you're related, like I also, when I talk to a lot of parents that want to buy something for their, their child, and is their child going to be responsible for any of it? Are they going to be renting it? Are they going to be, and it's,
Right.
But if they're going to co-own it, like where the parent is co-signing, you really have to have those discussions, because if you sign on the dotted line, you are responsible. And so, it's can be especially messy.
Yeah. And I think like in general, cause I have, I own property where we have like many partners. We buy property as a real estate syndication, and we have many partners come in as money partners only. They're called limited partners. And, we have conversations beforehand, because we have to ultimately have similar goals. And, you don't want to be in a situation where you buy property with someone and then they're like, oh, I need this money back for, my wedding, right? And it's like, well, real estate's not like a stock where you could just, log on and sell it. Like selling it is, a process, and could take 30 days, could take a few months. And so, and ultimately, you don't want to be forced to sell real estate ever. You're kind of put in a losing position. So you kind of have to have similar like timelines and similar goals. So I know this is a good question for, when thinking about buying investment property. Tons of people buy investment property in partnerships. And so that is something that, is good to just talk about beforehand. Okay.
Move forward thinking about a plan to buy. Do we set up an appointment with you? Funny you should ask.
Hey. Yeah, so actually we both have the best way to kind of get in touch with us is actually, I don't know if that's the case for you, Fiona, but the Calendly link. You can schedule a call, or we can just throw our info in the chat. But yeah, I love to, you can either talk to a lender first or me first, but ultimately you'll talk to both. And then kind of like craft the strategy and the plan. Do you have a Calendly link, Fiona?
You know what? I stopped using Calendly so much. Had some issues with it. But I put my information in there.
Cool.
And I am available. And I'm flexible too. Like I'll work late a couple nights a week, and I'm also available on the weekends too. So if you work
a couple nights a week, you're working late every single night of the week.
My New Year's resolution was I'll only do a few nights a week, but but yeah, no, I'm pretty flexible. So all virtual. So I mean, we do meet in person. If you wanted to. I actually personally am working remote 100%, and but I am happy to go have coffee or chat. We can do a Zoom call, we can do phone calls, whatever you're comfortable with. I am actually located in the South Bay, in Redondo Beach, but I work all of California, so up and down.
And I'm in West Adams, kind of mid-city Los Angeles, and also work all over SoCal, really. But yeah, I mean, and then, so yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We're, it's always great to do these workshops, and it's always fun to talk to people afterward. I hope you were inspired, and ultimately, like,
how many people already own properties in here?
Yeah, put a 1 if you own property in the chat. Put a 1 in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, great.
And
awesome.
If you want to own property, put a star, because you're going to be a star.
Superstar. Yeah. And then the other thing I would love to know is, you know, we obviously love to have these types of, I'm really big on consumer education, and I could talk all day, but we want to make sure we're gearing these towards what people are super interested in. So if there's something specific that you would like us to take a deeper dive into, or something we didn't touch on, let us know. Even if it's like, you know, pulling in, I don't know, a credit specialist, or pulling in somebody who's good with contracts or things like that. Like I said, we've built a pretty good team around us, and very generous with their wisdom. So we can definitely.
Here's how you can make me happy. This is what I tell people, because I give a lot of free advice, conversations. I'm like, do something.
Yes.
If I want to see, after we talk, after this workshop, I want to see you do something, take some action, right? Call Fiona, get pre-qualified, go to an investor meetup, go to Bigger Pockets and, you know, learn more about real estate. Whatever it is, I want you to take action. Because sometimes I talk to people and then I talk to them like a year late and they're just still calling me like, Sammy. And I'm like, what are you doing, boo?
The unknown is, you know, we fear the unknown. The more you know, the more you know. Yeah.
And I love it. Like it like gives me so much pleasure when I have conversations, and then the next time we talk, you're like, oh yeah, I bought an investment property. Oh yes, like I'm pre-qualified. Let's go, you know. And I'm like, yes. So that gives me joy, is you taking action. So that's what I want to see. And Fiona, thank you so much for your deep knowledge of all of all things financing, and because you're really the gatekeeper to all this.
Right? The money. Like, I'm the money bag.
She's the money bag. So.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think one of the things, and I mean, I know I say this all the time, but that partnership, so many people, you know, they want to get a realtor, and so many people, they, you know, they get their financing, but really, you know, whether you use us or not, I so encourage you to have a realtor and a lender that work together, no matter where you are, because that relationship and that back and forth, I mean, they are, the strategy is really key, especially right now. Right. And, you know, find somebody that you click with. I really encourage you to do that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. We will be sending out the recording, and so you will, you know, feel free to share it out. We'll send it out via email. If you probably signed up, so we have your email, but if not, you can send us a message. And so thank you, everyone, and have a
calls for this week. And
have a wonderful night, and talk to you soon.
Good night, everybody.